66 million years ago, on a morning that looked no different from 1,000 mornings before it, the Earth was quietly going about its ancient routines. Forests stretched unbroken from horizon to horizon, warm seas lapped against shallow coasts, and life moved according to rhythms refined over hundreds of millions of years. Dinosaurs walked, hunted, fed, and nested beneath a sky that had never betrayed them before. Nothing in the wind, the sunlight, or the slow drift of clouds hinted that history stood on the edge of a knife. Far beyond that sky, in the cold darkness where sunlight weakens into a distant glow, a massive body of rock and metal was racing through space. It had no intention, no awareness, no destiny carved into it. Its path was the result of countless invisible nudges, the gravitational pull of giant planets, the faint influence of passing debris, the slow chaos of orbital mechanics playing out over unimaginable spans of time. For millions of years, it had wandered. Now, by pure coincidence, its trajectory pointed toward a small blue planet filled with life. In our familiar history, that coincidence proved catastrophic. The object struck shallow seas, shattered the crust, poisoned the atmosphere, and plunged the world into darkness. Firestorms raged, oceans rose in towering walls, and photosynthesis collapsed beneath a veil of dust and sulfur. Within what amounts to a blink in geological time, nearly 3/4 of all species vanished. The age of dinosaurs ended not because they failed, but because the universe briefly lost its balance. But tonight we step away from that ending. Because that impact was never inevitable. It was not fate. It was chance. A difference of minutes, even seconds, would have rewritten everything. A slightly altered angle, a marginal shift in timing, and the same cosmic visitor would have met the Earth in a very different way. Instead of slamming into shallow coastal waters, it would have plunged into the deep Pacific, far from land. The explosion would still have been immense, the shockwaves still devastating, but the chemistry would have changed. The sulfur-rich rocks that poison the skies would have remained buried beneath kilometers of ocean. The dust would have settled quickly. The sun would have returned. The world would have staggered, but it would not have fallen. When dawn broke the next day, the dinosaurs would have awakened to a shaken planet, not a ruined one. Coastlines would have been scarred. Tsunamis would have erased entire ecosystems. Millions of animals would have died. But life on a global scale would have continued. Plants would have photosynthesized. Food chains would have recovered. The long, slow engine of evolution would have kept turning, uninterrupted. For the dinosaurs, nothing fundamental would have changed. They had survived worse. Massive volcanic eruptions had darkened skies before. Continents had split beneath their feet. Sea levels had risen and fallen, climates had shifted, forests had advanced and retreated. For over 165 million years, they had adapted to every challenge the planet had thrown at them. One more catastrophe, regional, not global, was simply another chapter, not the final page. This is the moment where history quietly splits in two. In one timeline, mammals inherit an empty world and rise into dominance. In the other, the dinosaurs remain exactly where they have always been, at the center of life on Earth. Apex predators, colossal herbivores, feathered hunters, and soaring giants continue their reign, not as relics clinging to survival, but as the most successful large animals the planet has ever produced. To understand what happens next, we need to let go of the version of the dinosaur world shaped by cartoons and old textbooks. The late Cretaceous Earth was not a primitive, struggling place waiting for a reset. It was rich, warm, and extraordinarily complex. Ice did not exist at the poles. Sea levels stood far higher than today, flooding continents and dividing them with shallow inland seas. North America was split in two by a vast, warm waterway. India drifted alone toward its collision with Asia. Australia remained tethered to Antarctica, both cloaked in forests. The atmosphere itself was different. Carbon dioxide levels were several times higher than modern values, trapping heat across the globe. Oxygen levels were slightly elevated, fueling enormous bodies and high metabolisms. Crocodilians lived near the Arctic Circle. Forests covered lands that would one day grind beneath ice sheets. And everywhere, on plains, in swamps, along riverbanks, beneath canopies, there were dinosaurs. This was not a world in decline. It was a world at its peak. Predators like Tyrannosaurus rex ruled entire ecosystems, not as sluggish brutes, but as finely tuned hunters with binocular vision sharper than that of modern birds of prey. Herbivores like Triceratops moved across the landscape in numbers so vast that they shaped the land itself, the living equivalent of continental forces. Hadrosaurs processed vegetation with dental machinery unmatched by any land animal before or since. Ankylosaurs carried armor that turned their bodies into walking fortresses. Above it all, pterosaurs with wingspans rivaling small aircraft ruled the skies. And in the shadows, mammals waited, not because they were weak, but because every major role was already filled by creatures better suited to it. This was the world that continued. With the asteroid's failure, extinction never cleared the stage. Evolution did not reset. Instead, it pressed forward, constrained by the same pressures that had shaped life for millions of years. Dinosaurs did not vanish. They diversified. They adapted. They inherited a planet that was about to change in ways far more challenging than a single cosmic impact. The warm stability of the Mesozoic would not last forever. Continents would drift into new positions. Mountains would rise, drawing carbon from the air. Ocean currents would shift, isolating Antarctica and locking it in ice. Grass would spread across the land, transforming forests into open plains. The world was cooling, drying, and becoming more seasonal, a slow revolution that no species could escape. And the dinosaurs would have to face it. Not in a moment of fire and darkness, but across tens of millions of years, where survival would depend not on luck, but on adaptability. The question was no longer whether dinosaurs could survive a disaster. They already had. The real question was whether they could evolve into something new, something capable of mastering a planet that no longer resembled the one that had made them kings. The Earth does not announce its transformations. It changes quietly, almost politely, while life adapts or disappears in response. Millions of years passed after the asteroid's near miss, and at first glance the planet still looked familiar. The continents crept across the globe at the pace of growing fingernails. The forests remained dense and green. The air stayed warm and heavy with moisture. To a dinosaur living through this era, the world would have seemed eternal, stable, unchanging. But evolution never sleeps, even when the scenery appears the same. Plants were already rewriting the rules of life on land. Flowering plants, once minor players beneath conifers and ferns, were spreading with relentless efficiency. They grew faster, reproduced more flexibly, and formed complex relationships with animals that carried their pollen and seeds. Over time, they transformed forests into places bursting with color, scent, and seasonal abundance. Fruits appeared in increasing variety, soft, sweet packages of energy designed to be eaten. Every fruit was an invitation, and evolution listens carefully to invitations like these. In this world without extinction, mammals were not the ones best positioned to accept it. They were still small, still constrained by competition from other mammal lineages and by the overwhelming presence of dinosaurs above them. Instead, it was the smaller, feathered dinosaurs, agile, intelligent, and already adapted for complex behavior, that found opportunity in the treetops. These creatures leapt between branches, manipulated food with clawed hands, and relied on sharp vision to navigate a three-dimensional world of leaves and light. Over generations, natural selection refined them into specialists of the canopy, animals whose lives revolved around fruiting seasons and forest architecture. Below them, the great herbivores continued their slow arms race with plants. As vegetation changed in texture and chemistry, so too did the mouths designed to process it. Hadrosaurs refined their extraordinary dental systems, turning plant matter into fuel with ruthless efficiency. Ceratopsians diversified further, their horns and frills reshaped by both display and defense. Sauropods, though no longer as dominant as in earlier eras, persisted wherever tall forests gave them access to food no one else could reach. Predators responded in kind. Tyrannosaurs did not remain frozen in their iconic form. Over millions of years, their bodies subtly shifted. Some lineages became lighter, faster, better suited to pursuing prey over longer distances. Others specialized further in ambush, evolving sensory systems that allowed them to detect movement, sound, and even vibration with astonishing precision. Smaller theropods flourished as well, filling niches that ranged from opportunistic scavengers to coordinated pack hunters. Then, roughly 55 million years ago, the planet was tested. A rapid surge in global temperatures pushed Earth into one of the hottest periods it had experienced in tens of millions of years. Polar regions turned subtropical. Rainforests crept toward the poles. Ocean chemistry shifted, stressing marine ecosystems and reshaping food webs. In our history, this event forced mammals to adapt quickly, shrinking body sizes and accelerating evolutionary change. In this alternate world, it was the dinosaurs who faced the heat. And they endured. Their biology, often misunderstood, proved remarkably resilient. Large-bodied dinosaurs retained heat slowly and shed it gradually, buffering them against temperature extremes. Feathered species adjusted their insulation dynamically, flattening plumage in heat and fluffing it in cooler conditions. Migration became more common, not just seasonally, but latitudinally as populations tracked favorable climates across continents. While land ecosystems reorganized, the oceans told a different story. Marine reptiles had never vanished here. Mosasaurs still ruled coastal waters, their streamlined bodies honed by evolution into efficient hunters of fish and squid. Plesiosaurs, strange and ancient, continued to patrol the seas with flippers that powered them through warm currents. As ocean temperatures rose, these reptiles adapted rather than yielding their niches. Some grew larger, others faster. The seas of this world never belonged to whales because whales never had the chance to evolve into them. Above the oceans, the skies remained crowded. Pterosaurs did not fade into extinction, they diversified. Some became long-distance soarers, gliding over open water for days at a time. Others specialized in coastal hunting, diving with precision to snatch prey from the waves. Birds shared the air with them, descendants of the same ancient lineage, competing in some spaces and avoiding each other in others. The sky, like the land, was never emptied. Eventually the heat retreated. The planet cooled, not abruptly but steadily, inexorably. Antarctica drifted into isolation, wrapped by a powerful ocean current that cut it off from tropical warmth. Ice formed for the first time in hundreds of millions of years. Sea levels dropped. Rainfall patterns shifted. The endless forests that had defined the dinosaur world began to fragment. Open spaces appeared. At first, these were patchy clearings and seasonal woodlands. Then, over millions of years, something revolutionary spread across the land. Grass. Tough, resilient, and nearly impossible to eliminate, it thrived where trees could not. It endured fire, grazing, drought, and cold. As grasslands expanded, they reshaped ecosystems from the ground up, creating environments where visibility was high, shelter was scarce, and survival depended on speed, endurance, and cooperation. For dinosaurs, this was unfamiliar territory. Forest specialists declined or retreated. Others transformed. Herbivores evolved bodies built for travel rather than maneuvering, longer legs, lighter frames, and behaviors centered on herding. Grazing demanded new dental solutions, and those lineages that developed ever-growing or rapidly replacing teeth flourished. Vast herds moved across open plains, shaping the land with their footsteps and feeding patterns. Predators faced even greater pressure. The old model of ambush was no longer enough. On open ground, prey could see danger from kilometers away. Success now favored intelligence, coordination, and stamina. Tyrannosaurs that adapted survived, slimming down, lengthening their limbs, and, most importantly, changing how they hunted. Cooperative behavior, once optional, became essential. Smaller theropods excelled here. Already fast and agile, many evolved complex social structures, communicating through calls, postures, and movement. Packs coordinated chases that lasted kilometers, wearing down prey through persistence rather than brute force. The grasslands echoed with life and death played out at breathtaking speed. Among these hunters, one lineage stood apart. Small, feathered, and unusually intelligent even by dinosaur standards, these creatures possessed brains that continued to grow relative to their bodies. Natural selection favored individuals that could remember landscapes, recognize companions, anticipate prey behavior, and adapt strategies on the fly. Over millions of years, their cognition deepened. They used simple tools. They learned from one another. Knowledge passed not just genetically but socially. They were not human. They did not stand upright or build cities. But they thought. Their intelligence was practical, grounded in survival. They planned hunts. They taught their young. They understood cause and effect in ways few animals ever have. In another lineage, under another set of circumstances, this might have been the seed of something more. But here, evolution had no reason to push further. These dinosaurs thrived exactly as they were. And so the world remained alive, dynamic, and utterly indifferent. No species ever rose to dominate the planet through technology. No cities scarred the land. No radios filled the air with artificial signals. Forests rose and fell. Ice advanced and retreated. Dinosaurs endured through ages of heat and cold, abundance and scarcity, adapting again and again without ever questioning their place in the universe. In this world, no one looked at the stars and wondered how they got there. The planet spun on, magnificent and silent, ruled by creatures perfectly shaped by time, unaware that in another timeline they had become a memory. As the ages rolled forward, the rhythm of the planet slowed into something colder and sharper. Ice advanced and withdrew in long breaths, carving valleys, redirecting rivers, reshaping continents grain by grain. The great grasslands waxed and waned with the climate, sometimes retreating before forests, sometimes surging outward in vast, wind-scoured seas of green. Through it all, the dinosaurs endured, not as static monuments of a vanished age, but as living lineages constantly refining themselves in response to change. The coldest periods tested them hardest. Winters grew longer at high latitudes, snow lingering where once rain had fallen. Darkness could stretch for months near the poles, a challenge unknown for most of their long history. Yet these conditions did not erase them. Feathered dinosaurs thrived where scales alone would have failed, their insulating coats thickening generation by generation. Many developed seasonal behaviors, migration routes passed down through instinct and learning, movements timed to the slow pulse of climate rather than the rising and setting of the sun. Some populations became permanent residents of the cold. In these regions, dinosaurs evolved stockier builds, reduced extremities, and dense plumage that trapped warmth even in bitter winds. Their metabolism slowed in winter months, conserving energy when food was scarce, then surged again with the return of light. They hunted beneath pale skies, leaving tracks in snow that would melt and vanish long before they could ever be preserved. In the warmer regions, life followed a different path. Tropical belts shrank but never disappeared, forming refuges of biodiversity where ancient lineages persisted alongside newer forms. Here, competition was relentless. Species differentiated themselves by subtle advantages: slightly better vision, marginally more efficient digestion, a fractionally smarter brain. Over millions of years, these small differences compounded into dramatic diversity. Mammals remained part of this world, but they never escaped its margins. They diversified in size and shape within the niches left available to them. Burrowers, climbers, nocturnal omnivores, aquatic specialists along rivers and coasts. Some became clever, some social, some surprisingly long-lived. But the ecological ceiling imposed by dinosaurs never lifted. Large herbivore roles, apex predator roles, aerial dominance, these remained firmly occupied. In the oceans, marine reptiles continued their ancient reign. Mosasaurs evolved into multiple forms, some massive and slow-cruising, others sleek and fast, chasing schools of fish through open water. Plesiosaurs refined their strange designs, some developing powerful neck muscles for ambush, others shortening their necks and emphasizing speed. The seas were dangerous, vibrant, and utterly alien compared to the mammal-dominated oceans we know. Birds, too, followed a different destiny. Without the sudden disappearance of their closest competitors, they never exploded into dominance. Instead, they remained one successful lineage among many, sharing the skies with pterosaurs and competing along the edges of opportunity. Some became brilliant flyers, others ground dwellers or swimmers, but none rose to absolute control of the air. Time continued its patient work. Volcanoes rose and eroded. Mountain ranges lifted continents into new climates. Rivers carved their way toward shifting seas. Species appeared, flourished, and vanished, replaced by others better suited to the moment. Through all this change, one truth remained constant. No single intelligence ever bent the planet to its will. There were no farms reshaping ecosystems overnight, no mines hollowing mountains, no engines rewriting the chemistry of the atmosphere. Extinction still happened, local, regional, sometimes severe, but they unfolded within the natural bounds of life's long balance. Recovery followed loss. Complexity returned after collapse. In this world, the night sky was darker than any human has ever known. No satellites traced artificial paths across the stars. No cities glowed on the horizon. The Milky Way stretched clearly from one end of the sky to the other, reflected faintly in oceans still ruled by reptiles older than mammals themselves. If an observer could have existed, if anything could have stepped outside the flow of time to look back, it might have noticed something extraordinary. Not progress, not destiny, but persistence. Life was not marching toward a goal. It was circling endlessly around survival, adapting without ambition, changing without intent. The dinosaurs never became legends here. They never became monsters or myths. They simply remained animals, exquisitely shaped by evolution, filling their world as completely as mammals fill ours. Their reign did not end with fire from the sky, but with the quiet truth that no rain lasts forever, only life does. And somewhere, in a universe vast enough to allow countless possibilities, another small blue planet followed a different path. One where a rock did not miss. One where intelligence learned to remember, to record, to wonder. One where the dinosaurs became ghosts and humans became the storytellers. But in this world there were no stories. Only wind moving through grass. Only feathers shifting against cold air. Only the steady, unbroken continuation of a planet that never knew how close it came to changing everything. Time, indifferent and unstoppable, continued to stretch forward. Ice ages deepened and relaxed in long cycles, each one subtly reshaping the living world. Glaciers advanced like slow, grinding thoughts, then retreated again, leaving behind fertile soils and altered landscapes. Rivers changed their courses. Coastlines moved. Entire habitats disappeared while new ones quietly emerged in their place. Through all of it, the descendants of dinosaurs adjusted, not with drama or sudden leaps, but with the patient, incremental logic of evolution. Some lineages vanished, unable to cope with colder winters or shifting food sources. Others flourished precisely because of those challenges. In open plains, fast-running herbivores became even more specialized, their bodies optimized for endurance rather than raw speed. Their lungs and hearts supported long-distance travel, allowing them to migrate across continents in response to seasonal change. Predators followed them, packs stretching their hunting ranges across vast territories, their social bonds tightening as cooperation became the difference between hunger and survival. In forest refuges that clung to river valleys and equatorial zones, a different kind of life persisted. Here, smaller dinosaurs refined intelligence rather than size. Memory mattered more than muscle. Knowing when fruit would ripen, where insects would emerge after rain, or which trees offered shelter during storms became advantages passed from generation to generation. Vocalizations grew more nuanced. Displays became more symbolic. Behavior, not anatomy, became the primary frontier of adaptation. Yet even here, intelligence never escaped the boundaries of nature. These animals did not seek to dominate their environment. They responded to it. Their tools were simple and transient, used and discarded without altering ecosystems in lasting ways. Fire never became a servant. Stone never became a weapon. Knowledge existed only as long as living minds carried it forward. As millions more years passed, the planet entered colder and more volatile phases. Ice sheets periodically crept deep into continents, fragmenting populations and forcing rapid adaptation. In isolation, new species arose. Some grew smaller to conserve energy. Others grew larger, relying on thermal mass to endure long winters. Feathers diversified into countless forms, dense insulating layers, sleek water-resistant coats, elaborate displays used to communicate across snowy plains or misty forests. The skies changed as well. Pterosaurs, though ancient, did not stagnate. Some lineages shrank and became agile, maneuvering through forest canopies. Others grew enormous, masters of high-altitude currents, able to cross oceans with minimal effort. Birds evolved alongside them, not replacing but complementing, each lineage carving out its own place in the aerial world. The oceans, ever dynamic, remained ruled by reptiles. As currents shifted and temperatures fluctuated, marine reptiles adapted their feeding strategies and migration patterns. Coral reefs expanded and collapsed. Deep-sea ecosystems evolved in darkness, untouched by surface drama. Life thrived in forms that no human mind would ever imagine, because no human mind would ever arise to imagine them. Eventually the planet reached a fragile equilibrium. Ice waxed and waned. Grasslands stabilized. Forests found new boundaries. Dinosaurs, in all their diversity, occupied nearly every large animal niche available on land. Mammals remained clever, adaptable, and persistent, but small. Always present. Never dominant. From the outside, if such a perspective were possible, this Earth would appear balanced. Alive but not accelerating toward anything. No runaway technologies. No mass extinctions driven by a single species. No permanent scars etched into the planet's surface by conscious design. This was not a better world, that it was not a worse one. It was simply a different answer to the same question life had always been asking. How long can you persist? In this timeline, dinosaurs answered that question for hundreds of millions of years more. Not as rulers crowned by fate, but as survivors refined by time. Their world never ended in fire. It never began again in ashes. It just kept going, quietly, endlessly, until even memory itself became unnecessary. And somewhere beyond this planet, the universe continued expanding, stars lived and died, galaxies drifted apart, utterly unaware that one small world had once stood at the crossroads of possibility, and chosen by chance alone, to remain exactly what it was. By the time another 10 million years had passed, the Earth had begun to look familiar again. Familiar not in the sense of sameness but in rhythm. Change had slowed, not because evolution had paused, but because life had learned how to move with the planet rather than against it. The great pulses of climate no longer came as shocks. They arrived as seasons stretched across millennia, predictable enough for adaptation, unforgiving enough to punish complacency. In this world, survival was no longer about dominance alone. It was about flexibility. Some dinosaur lineages became masters of migration. Entire populations moved across continents in vast, living currents, following temperature gradients and vegetation belts that shifted north and south over thousands of years. These migrations were not chaotic. They were structured, guided by inherited instincts and reinforced by learned behavior. Young animals memorized routes by following elders. Landmarks, mountain chains, river systems, coastlines, became part of an unspoken mental map passed down through generations. Other lineages chose a different strategy. Rather than move, they adapted in place. In regions where winters became brutal, dinosaurs evolved seasonal physiologies. Growth slowed during cold months. Fat reserves accumulated during periods of abundance. Some species entered states of reduced activity, not true hibernation, but a controlled lowering of metabolism that allowed them to survive months of scarcity without exhausting their energy. This was not something their ancestors had ever needed, but evolution rarely asks permission before rewriting the rules. Predator-prey relationships grew more complex with every passing age. Herbivores became more alert, more coordinated. Herds developed layered social structures, with sentinels positioned at the edges, younger individuals protected at the center, and experienced adults guiding movement and response. Alarm calls diversified, each sound carrying specific meaning: approaching danger, distant movement, aerial threat. Panic was no longer random. It was managed. Predators, in turn, became students of behavior rather than brute force. Hunting success depended on understanding patterns. When herds moved, how they reacted, which individuals were most vulnerable and which were too dangerous to target. Cooperation deepened. Roles within hunting groups became more defined. Some individuals specialized in pursuit, others in interception, others in delivering the final, lethal strike. Intelligence, once an advantage, became a necessity. This arms race did not produce peace, but it did produce balance. While land ecosystems refined themselves, the coastlines became places of extraordinary diversity. Where rivers met the sea, life exploded in complexity. Semi-aquatic dinosaurs evolved, spending much of their time wading through shallow waters, feeding on fish, crustaceans, and aquatic plants. Their bodies became streamlined, their limbs adapted for both walking and swimming. These creatures blurred the boundary between land and sea, occupying niches that in another world would belong to mammals that never appeared here. The skies, too, told a story of coexistence rather than conquest. Pterosaurs and birds continued to share the air, their differences preventing total overlap. Pterosaurs dominated long-distance soaring and large-body flight, while birds excelled in maneuverability, rapid acceleration, and fine control. Competition existed, but so did specialization. The sky was not owned, it was negotiated. And still mammals remained. They adapted endlessly, cleverly, persistently. Some became excellent climbers, navigating trees with precision. Others perfected burrowing lifestyles, constructing complex underground networks that protected them from predators and climate extremes. A few became aquatic, slipping into rivers and coastal shallows, feeding on invertebrates and small fish. Their intelligence grew in subtle ways, expressed through problem-solving and social bonding, but always within limits set by the overwhelming presence of dinosaurs above them. The planet never cleared space for them to rise. As millions more years passed, something remarkable became evident. Without a technological species to accelerate change, ecosystems achieved levels of complexity rarely seen. Predator numbers remained naturally regulated by prey availability. Vegetation recovered after disturbances without intervention. Fire reshaped landscapes but never escaped control. Extinction events occurred, but they unfolded slowly enough for life to respond, reconfigure, and persist. The Earth breathed. From space, if anyone could have watched, the planet would have appeared alive in the deepest sense. Dynamic but stable, changing but never unraveling. No artificial lights glimmered on the night side. No scars of industry cut across continents. Just weather systems swirling, oceans circulating heat, forests rising and falling in response to ancient rhythms. In this timeline, nothing ever tried to conquer the planet. Life did not aim upward toward dominance. It spread outward, filling every available space with variation and resilience. The dinosaurs, once nearly erased by chance, became the long-term expression of that resilience, not as tyrants of evolution, but as its most enduring students. And the universe, vast and silent, never noticed the difference. As the planet moved deeper into this long equilibrium, evolution began to favor something subtler than strength or speed. Stability rewarded awareness. In landscapes where change came slowly but relentlessly, the animals that thrived were those that could anticipate rather than simply react. Across several dinosaur lineages, perception sharpened. Vision became more precise, not just in detecting movement but in reading intention. Sounds carried layered meaning. Scents conveyed information about age, health, and emotional state. The world grew richer, not louder, but more intelligible to those shaped to read it. Social life became increasingly important. Many species no longer lived as loose aggregations but as structured communities. Bonds formed early and lasted for life. Cooperation extended beyond hunting or defense and into parenting, learning, and collective memory. Young dinosaurs did not rely on instinct alone. They learned by watching, imitating, and practicing within safe boundaries created by older members of the group. Mistakes were corrected. Successful behaviors were reinforced. Survival knowledge accumulated, not in objects or symbols, but in living relationships. With this came emotion, not in the human sense but as biological states powerful enough to guide behavior. Attachment reduced risky dispersal. Grief altered movement patterns when individuals were lost. Aggression was tempered by recognition and familiarity. These were not accidents. Natural selection favored animals that could function within complex societies without destroying them from within. As intelligence deepened in these ways, it did not explode into abstraction. There were no questions about existence, no symbolic art, no rituals meant to explain the universe. Awareness remained anchored to the present world. Memory served survival, not storytelling. The mind evolved only as far as it needed to, and no further. The climates continued their cycles. During colder epochs, ecosystems compressed toward the equator. Competition intensified. Marginal species vanished. During warmer phases, life expanded again, refilling spaces left empty. This constant contraction and expansion acted as a filter, rewarding versatility and punishing excess specialization. Dinosaurs that could switch diets, adjust social structures, or alter movement patterns survived where rigid forms did not. Some lineages grew smaller over time, trading size for efficiency. Others remained massive, but only where resources supported them year-round. There was no universal trend, no direction toward gigantism or miniaturization, only local solutions to local problems. Evolution did not care about grandeur. It cared about continuity. On isolated landmasses, especially islands formed by shifting seas, evolution experimented freely. Strange forms arose: dwarf giants, oversized small species, predators without close competitors. These ecosystems were fragile but inventive, producing animals that would appear fantastical to any human observer. Yet when conditions changed, many of these lineages vanished as quickly as they had appeared, reminders that innovation without resilience rarely lasts. The oceans reflected this same pattern. Marine reptiles continued to evolve in parallel with fish and invertebrates, locked in endless feedback loops of adaptation. Vision sharpened in deeper waters. Bioluminescence spread. Communication through vibration and pressure replaced sight where light could not reach. Entire worlds existed beneath the waves, unseen and untouched by the dramas unfolding on land. Through all of this, the absence of a technological species shaped everything. There was no sudden acceleration, no break in natural feedback systems. Carbon cycles remained balanced. Atmospheric composition shifted only through geological and biological processes. The planet regulated itself, imperfectly but persistently. Life never escaped nature because nothing tried to. The dinosaurs of this era were not superior to their ancestors. They were simply more refined expressions of the same principles. They lived, reproduced, competed, and died within limits set by the world around them. Their success was measured not in dominance but in duration. And duration in this timeline was everything. While stars formed and collapsed far beyond this planet, while galaxies drifted apart in silent expansion, Earth remained a self-contained experiment. One where chance had removed a single catastrophe and, in doing so, allowed life to continue without interruption. No one marked the passage of time. No calendars counted the ages. But life endured, moment after moment, age after age, unaware that it had once stood on the edge of a very different future. As epochs layered themselves one upon another, the Earth entered a phase where change was no longer dramatic but cumulative. Nothing sudden announced a new era. Instead, subtle shifts compounded over immense spans of time, gradually reshaping the living world in ways no single generation could perceive. Landscapes aged. Soils deepened. Forests learned where to grow and where not to return. Rivers settled into ancient paths that only great tectonic movements could disrupt. Dinosaurs, shaped by this slow persistence, became increasingly efficient expressions of life rather than extravagant ones. Energy waste was selected against. Excess ornamentation faded unless it served communication or mating. Movements became economical. Bodies reflected balance more than power. In many species, longevity increased, not because life was easier, but because individuals that learned landscapes deeply and survived repeated cycles of scarcity became invaluable to group survival. Elders mattered. Older individuals carried knowledge that could not be encoded in instinct alone. They remembered rare droughts, unusual migrations, dangerous territories, and shifting predator patterns. Groups that retained and protected these individuals endured environmental fluctuations better than those that did not. Over time, behaviors emerged that reduced unnecessary risk for aging members. The survival of experience became a quiet cornerstone of evolutionary success. This did not create hierarchy in the human sense. There were no rulers, no leaders issuing commands. Influence emerged organically, shaped by recognition rather than authority. Younger animals followed because it worked, not because they were compelled to. Social cohesion became fluid, responsive, and resilient. As intelligence stabilized at this level, something else subtly declined: unchecked aggression. In crowded ecosystems where outright dominance led to constant injury and energy loss, restraint proved advantageous. Conflicts became more ritualized. Displays replaced fights whenever possible. Posturing, vocalization, and symbolic movement resolved disputes without bloodshed. Violence remained, but it was increasingly purposeful rather than constant. Predators, too, reflected this shift. Hunting remained lethal, but unnecessary conflict within groups diminished. Cooperation required trust, and trust required predictability. The most successful hunters were not the most aggressive, but the most reliable. Across continents, biodiversity reached extraordinary heights. Not because new forms constantly emerged, but because old ones persisted. Ecosystems grew layered and interdependent, with species occupying finely tuned niches that minimized overlap. Collapse became rare, not because systems were invulnerable, but because redundancy softened failure. When one species declined, another often expanded to fill its role without unraveling the whole. In this world, extinction still occurred, but quietly. Species faded rather than vanished. Lineages thinned, fragmented, and eventually dissolved into others through gradual evolutionary drift. The dramatic erasures that define human history's fossil record were absent here. There were no sharp lines, only blurred transitions. The planet itself aged gracefully. Mountain ranges eroded into rounded forms. Volcanic activity slowed. Continental collisions reshaped climates slowly enough for life to track the change. Ice ages continued, but none reached the severity of those that would one day dominate the human timeline. The biosphere had learned flexibility. It bent rather than broke. The night remained untouched. Stars burned unobstructed. The moon continued its silent pull, stabilizing the planet's tilt, moderating seasons, guiding tides. No creature ever measured it, named it, or imagined walking upon it. Yet its influence shaped every coastal ecosystem, every migration timed to the rhythm of tides. From one perspective, this world lacked ambition. Nothing reached beyond its biological limits. Nothing sought permanence or expansion beyond Earth itself. But from another perspective, it achieved something extraordinarily rare: continuity without collapse. Life did not need to be remembered here. It did not need witnesses. The dinosaurs did not know they had survived extinction. They did not know their reign had been spared by chance. They did not know there had ever been another possible future. They simply existed, generation after generation, perfectly adapted to a planet that never asked them to be anything more than alive. And so the Earth continued, not racing toward an end, not climbing toward progress, but moving forward in a long, unbroken line of living moments, where survival itself was the only legacy that mattered. Over time, even continuity itself became a kind of pressure. When nothing collapsed dramatically, when no single shock reset the world, evolution worked with finer instruments. Differences that once would have been erased by catastrophe now had time to matter. Slight advantages accumulated. Minor inefficiencies disappeared. Life refined itself not through upheaval, but through patience. One of the most profound changes unfolded almost invisibly: perception of time. Dinosaurs did not conceptualize the future, but their behavior increasingly reflected anticipation. Seasonal preparation became more precise. Movement synchronized not just with weather, but with long-term environmental patterns. Breeding cycles aligned with subtle ecological signals, soil moisture, plant chemistry, insect emergence, cues too faint for any single sense, yet unmistakable when integrated together. This integration favored brains that could combine information across domains. Not larger brains but better organized ones. Neural efficiency mattered more than raw capacity. In some lineages, decision-making became faster and more accurate. Mistakes carried high costs in stable systems, where competition was constant and margins were thin. Those who chose correctly survived. Those who hesitated or chose poorly did not. Yet even as cognition sharpened, consciousness remained grounded. There was no abstraction detached from immediate reality. Thought did not wander into symbols or imagined worlds. Awareness remained embedded in environment and body, inseparable from movement, sensation, and social interaction. Intelligence evolved as a tool for living, not for questioning existence. As ages passed, ecosystems reached a level of interdependence that bordered on fragility, but never crossed it. Parasites, predators, prey, plants, and decomposers formed intricate networks where energy flowed with remarkable efficiency. Death fed life so seamlessly that decay itself became almost invisible. Carcasses rarely lingered. Nutrients returned to the soil quickly. Nothing was wasted for long. Fire continued to play its ancient role. Lightning ignited grasslands and forests, clearing space, renewing soil, maintaining balance. But without human intervention, fires followed natural limits. They burned where fuel accumulated and stopped where conditions changed. Life adapted to them without fear, timing reproduction and movement around their predictable rhythms. The dinosaurs most deeply shaped by this world no longer resembled the giants that once defined their kind in the public imagination of another timeline. Many were medium-sized, highly mobile, socially complex, and behaviorally flexible. They thrived not by overpowering their environment, but by fitting into it with precision. The colossal forms still existed, but they were fewer, restricted to regions where stability and abundance could sustain them across long spans of time. In the margins of this world, mammals continued their quiet persistence. They were never eliminated, never overwhelmed to extinction. Their small size and adaptability kept them alive through every shift. Some became extraordinarily specialized. Others remained generalists, capable of surviving almost anywhere without excelling in any single domain. Their story was one of endurance without expansion. And still nothing broke the pattern. The absence of a technological species meant the planet never accelerated beyond itself. No feedback loops spiraled out of control. No single organism altered the atmosphere faster than it could recover. Evolution remained the slowest, strongest force shaping the biosphere. Eventually, the sun itself began its imperceptible change. Its output increased by fractions of a percent, warming the planet just enough to matter over millions of years. Climates adjusted once more. Ice retreated further than before. Tropical zones expanded. Sea levels rose. Life responded as it always had, by moving, adapting, and transforming. There was no awareness that this was part of a larger story. No understanding that even stability has an expiration date. But that did not matter. Meaning was not required for life to continue. In this world, existence was enough. The dinosaurs did not conquer time. They flowed with it. And in doing so, they achieved something rarer than dominance, rarer than intelligence, rarer than memory itself. They endured without ever needing to know why. The world had grown old, not in the sense of decay or exhaustion, but in the quiet, confident way that ancient things do when time becomes part of their very structure. Mountains no longer rose sharply, they settled into long, folded silhouettes softened by millions of seasons. Rivers no longer rushed with youthful violence. They meandered like wandering thoughts, etching new paths only when the land gently encouraged them to. Forests grew in patterns older than memory, their boundaries shifting with the patience of continents rather than the urgency of weather. Across this matured earth, life existed as though woven directly into its fabric. Nothing fought the planet's slow pulse anymore, everything moved in tune with it. The dinosaurs that inherited this long rhythm were not the towering titans of ancient ages nor the primal juggernauts imagined in distant human fantasies. They had become something far more refined. Creatures sculpted by countless generations of adaptation, each one a subtle answer to challenges that had unfolded too gradually for drama. Their shapes reflected purpose rather than spectacle. Some were sleek and wind-shaped, built for days-long journeys across grasslands where horizons wavered in endless heat. Others were compact and dense, bundles of warmth crafted for surviving months of winter dimness. Feathers, once limited to insulation or display, had diversified into textures almost as varied as the leaves that rustled beneath them. Some shimmered with oils that repelled snow. Others formed overlapping layers that trapped heat with extraordinary efficiency. In the high latitudes, where twilight stretched for weeks and the sun skimmed endlessly along the horizon, these feathered forms moved in coordinated patterns shaped by instinct sharpened through ages. The cold was no longer an enemy. It was simply another season, another teacher in the long curriculum of survival. Here, predators had developed a remarkable stillness. They hunted as shadows, conserving energy with such precision that even breathing seemed measured. Their senses adapted to dim light and muffled sound, to the crackling whisper of frost settling on branches, to the faint exhalations of prey barely distinguishable from wind. They learned not to chase but to wait for the world to come close enough to touch. Prey species, in turn, had become masters of communal vigilance. Herds no longer panicked in disorganized bursts. Movements rippled through them like currents in a single organism. Subtle shifts in posture, synchronized steps, low vibrations transmitted through the ground. Young individuals learned early that survival depended not on their own strength, but on reading the ever-changing atmosphere of the group. Far to the south, where cold forests gave way to temperate expanses and finally to warm, sprawling lowlands, life embraced abundance in forms so diverse that a distant observer might mistake this era for a second flowering of the planet. Forest canopies shimmered with colors and shapes bred by millions of years of selective pressure. Fruits appeared in rhythms matched to the breeding cycles of animals that relied on them. Flowers evolved scents that traveled far, carrying coded messages across humid air. And in these forests lived creatures whose intelligence, while never designed to be reflective or symbolic, had reached astonishing nuance. They remembered the locations of nutrient-rich clay deposits that their ancestors had used for generations to neutralize plant toxins. They mapped territories not through landmarks alone, but through seasonal changes, where certain insects emerged after storms, where water pooled in drought, where fruits ripened earliest. They learned migration corridors from their elders, memorizing subtle curves in the land and the way sunlight fell through the canopy during different times of year. Communication among them grew increasingly layered. Sounds conveyed mood, direction, urgency, and subtle environmental details. Movements added context, tilts of the head, shifts of the tail, ripples of feathers signaling alliances or intentions. Knowledge did not accumulate through tools or writing, but through teaching, repetition, and shared experience. Their societies were not structured by hierarchy, but by patterns of cooperation that flowed with the ease of water following gravity. They did not contemplate the stars or imagine futures. But they understood the world intimately, in ways no human mind, bound by abstraction and language, could fully replicate. Their intelligence was rooted, grounded, anchored in the physical reality of the world rather than drifting above it. Yet even within such refined harmony, the planet continued to shift. The slow warming of the sun, the imperceptible drift of continents, and the changing chemistry of oceans set new challenges into motion. Rain patterns began to rearrange themselves. Old routes became unreliable. Familiar feeding grounds changed in subtle but increasing ways. Forests that had stood unchallenged for millions of years began to retract, making room for ecosystems far more open, far more vulnerable, and far more exposed to the volatile rhythms of climate. And in these newly forming landscapes, something unexpected began to emerge. A behavior not new but amplified, stretched into forms evolution had been quietly encouraging all along. Exploration. Not in the human sense of curiosity for its own sake, but as a survival strategy rooted in necessity. Groups began to push beyond their traditional ranges. Younger individuals, less bound by inherited patterns, ventured into unfamiliar territories in search of food, shelter, and mating opportunities. Some discoveries proved dangerous. Others opened possibilities that slowly reshaped the distribution of species across entire continents. Predators followed this expansion, though more cautiously. Their success depended not on novelty but on predictability. Yet even they adapted. Hunting strategies changed. Cooperative patterns shifted. New alliances formed between individuals from populations that had once been isolated. These interactions created genetic mixing that accelerated adaptation, weaving new threads into the tapestry of life. The oceans, too, responded to shifting climates. Marine reptiles that had ruled for tens of millions of years felt the pressure of changing temperatures and currents. Some species dwindled. Others migrated. Still others adapted in unexpected ways, pushing into deeper waters, altering their feeding strategies, refining their sensory systems to detect prey across greater distances. Meanwhile, birds, forever the adaptable descendants of ancient theropods, explored ecological space that had opened between pterosaurs and smaller feathered dinosaurs. Their forms multiplied in ways subtle yet significant: changes in wing shape for gliding along thermal currents, refinements in bone structure for rapid maneuvering, vocal variations that stretched communication into new acoustic territories. But even with these transformations, the world remained profoundly balanced. No species spiraled into unchecked expansion. No organism altered its environment faster than natural processes could compensate. Extinctions remained part of the cycle, not anomalies. New life filled old spaces with the quiet inevitability of falling leaves replaced by spring growth. If one were to stand at the edge of a plateau overlooking a warm valley in this world, if one possessed the impossible ability to see across scales of time, one would notice something subtle yet profound. The earth had become self-correcting. Not through consciousness, but through complexity so vast and intertwined that disruption rarely exceeded recovery. Feedback loops evolved naturally. Ecosystems compensated for shifts the way a forest compensates for the loss of a tree, slowly, patiently, and without intent. Life did not dominate the planet, it sustained it. And among all the creatures that moved through this equilibrium, none were aware of the extraordinary experiment they were part of, a world where catastrophe never reset the stage, where intelligence never broke free from its ecological boundaries, where evolution refined without accelerating, and where the story of life continued not toward climax, but toward deeper and deeper continuity. This was a planet without memory, without ambition, without regret. And yet, in its silence and persistence, it held a kind of beauty no other timeline would ever know. The world's transformations rarely arrived with noise. They did not roar in with violence or vanish with sudden collapse. Instead, they crept in like a change of wind before a distant storm, subtle at first, almost polite, then persistent enough that even the most ancient species could feel the difference in the marrow of their existence. Across the planet's broad middle latitudes, regions that had once been thick with forest began to open. It did not happen all at once. Centuries passed without noticeable change, then millennia in which the trees grew thinner, more scattered, their roots competing for moisture that no longer arrived in predictable abundance. Dry seasons lengthened. Storm patterns shifted. Rivers braided into multiple shallow channels that wandered aimlessly across newly exposed floodplains. What emerged in place of the forest was not the lush, shaded world that had dominated for so long, but a landscape of light and movement, grasslands that rippled like the surface of a restless ocean, stretching farther with each passing epoch. Grasses learned to grow low and anchor themselves deep into the soil, resisting the pull of wind and the press of hooves. They evolved silica-rich blades that dulled the teeth of any creature not adapted to their harsh resilience. Fires swept through these plains often, burning with fast, clean efficiency that cleared old growth and fertilized the earth for new shoots. The world was growing brighter, harsher, more exposed. And the dinosaurs adapted. The great plant eaters, once creatures of dense forests and cool shade, modified their bodies for a life lived in the open. Some lineages lengthened their limbs, allowing for more efficient travel over long distances. Others developed digestive systems capable of breaking down the tough, abrasive grasses that now formed the backbone of entire ecosystems. Herds grew larger, their movements more synchronized, partly for protection and partly because the land itself demanded constant motion. A single valley could no longer support a stationary population. Only those willing to travel survived. Predators followed. They always did. But these predators were not the lumbering giants that once defined prehistoric imagination. They had become sleek, enduring distance runners capable of shadowing herds for days at a time. Their feathers grew thinner to release heat more efficiently. Their lungs and hearts expanded in capacity, turning them into masters of stamina. Cooperation deepened among them, not a symbolic cooperation, not a moral choice, but a biological refinement that made group hunting more successful than solitary pursuit. Their social structures grew sophisticated, not in philosophy, not in symbolism, but in raw evolutionary logic. Position mattered within these groups. Some individuals took on roles as scouts, reading wind direction and the faint vibrations carried through the ground. Others specialized in close pursuit, their bodies built for rapid acceleration rather than long-range endurance. Still others delivered the final strike, their bite strength focused on precision rather than brute force. These divisions were not consciously assigned. They emerged through instinct, subtle pressure, and the quiet influence of experience passed from generation to generation. Not all lineages moved toward speed. Not all terrains demanded endurance. In regions where wetlands replaced forest, different transformations unfolded. Some herbivores pressed closer to the water, their bodies flattening into wider, more buoyant shapes. Their limbs shortened slightly, spreading out like paddles. Skin thickened to resist cold and moisture. These creatures did not resemble the swamp dwellers of the distant Mesozoic, but something new, semi-aquatic specialists that thrived where land and water blurred into one shifting mosaic of reeds, mud, and shallow pools. Predators here changed as well, though differently than their plains-running cousins. Stalking the edge of the marsh demanded silence, patience, and explosive power rather than endurance. Evolution selected for creatures that could become still as stone, waiting among the cattails before launching themselves in sudden arcs of violence. Feathers darkened to match the mottled shadows of the wetland vegetation. Vocalizations grew faint, almost whispered, suited for communication that would not betray their presence. Where the wetlands met the newly forming grasslands, a third kind of predator emerged, adaptable, opportunistic, intelligent in a way that made them masters of transition zones. These creatures learned to read the boundaries between ecosystems, understanding intuitively where prey migrated, where herds crossed, where resources peaked and vanished. They did not specialize in speed or stealth alone, but in versatility. Their diets expanded. Their movements reflected a flexible understanding of territory that had no rigid edges. Among them, intelligence sharpened further. It was not intellect in the human sense that it was not abstract, symbolic, or creative that it was practical, grounded, tuned to the environment like a finely crafted instrument. They learned seasonal rhythms with precision. They remembered the outcomes of encounters. They adjusted strategies based on the behavior of other species. They developed complex vocal patterns capable of expressing subtle meaning, warnings, invitations, boundaries, intentions. Over time, these vocal systems became so refined that whole groups could coordinate without ever breaking cover. A single low whistle carried across grass might signal the presence of calves or juveniles in a herd. A soft trill might indicate shifting winds. A brief clicking sound might communicate the direction of patrol movement. These were not languages of ideas, they were languages of survival. The world had not produced thinkers that it had produced readers, readers of landscapes, climates, and behaviors with an acuity no human mind could rival. Farther south, in the warm tropical belts that had never surrendered to ice or drought, the forests remained vibrant refuges of ancient life. Here, dinosaurs grew smaller and more delicate, not from weakness but from necessity. Light filtered through dense canopies and shifting mosaics that demanded agility. Branches became roads, trunks became pillars, vines became bridges woven by time itself. The creatures who lived here used all of it. Their feathers lengthened, not for insulation but for balance and display. Colors bloomed across their bodies, iridescent greens, deep blues, flashes of gold, shaped by sexual selection and the need to signal within dim, layered light. Intelligence here took the form of play, exploration, and curiosity, because in a world of three-dimensional complexity, those who understood their environment best lived longest. They learned songs, long repeating sequences of trills and whistles that echoed through the canopy. Some were used to attract mates. Others marked the boundaries of foraging zones. A few served no obvious purpose at all, except perhaps the joy-stitched instincts of organisms shaped by a world where expression itself held evolutionary value. In these forests, the world felt almost timeless. Almost. But even here, change whispered. As temperatures shifted, as rainfall patterns altered just enough to matter, certain species found themselves pressured toward new behaviors. Fruit-bearing trees changed their timing. Insects altered their cycles. Rivers flooded differently. Over generations, populations moved upward into the highlands or outward toward the grassland's edge, where they encountered new opportunities and new competitors. The planet was gently, steadily being rearranged. Not destroyed. Not shaken apart. Simply rewritten. In one such transition zone, where forest met open steppe, a remarkable lineage began to take shape, small feathered hunters with exceptional memory and unparalleled perception. They were not the largest predators nor the fastest, but they understood patterns better than any species before them. They observed herd behavior not occasionally but constantly. They learned which individuals were weak long before the herd revealed it. They anticipated flight paths during panic. They recognized shifts in plant growth that signaled drought or abundance. They followed other predators not to steal kills, but to map the movements of prey more effectively. Some individuals even experimented with simple problem-solving behaviors, rolling stones to expose insects, dropping nuts from small heights to crack them, using sticks to prod burrows into revealing hidden rodents. These were isolated acts, unconnected, unrecorded, never evolving into tools or culture. But they marked the edges of what evolution was sculpting. Not a symbolic mind but a supremely adaptive one. These creatures would never build, never invent, never reshape the world. But they would thrive in almost any environment the shifting climate offered. And that was enough. In this era of quiet transformation, the world did not need architects of change. It needed participants willing to move with the currents of time rather than fight them. The dinosaurs had become masters of exactly that, resilience without revolution. If one could listen closely, beneath the wind and the rustle of grass, beneath the calls of distant predators and chorus of forest creatures, they might hear the true heartbeat of this world, not ambition, not conquest, but continuation, unbroken, unhurried, untouched by the weight of destiny. Change had become the planet's silent companion, a presence felt more than seen. It whispered through shifting winds, murmured through altered currents, and traced faint patterns across landscapes that had once seemed eternal. Even the oldest lineages, shaped by deep time and accustomed to cycles far longer than any single lifetime, moved with a subtle edge of anticipation, as though some instinct buried beneath countless generations sensed the world preparing for another slow, sweeping transformation. Across the expanding grasslands, the air grew warmer, fuller, carrying scents that traveled immense distances before dissipating. Dust lifted easily now, stirred by herds whose numbers fluctuated with the rhythms of climate, spreading across the plains in broad waves of movement. Where once forests had kept the air heavy with moisture and shade, the sun now ruled with an unapologetic brightness that spilled across valleys and rolled up the sides of ancient hills. On these open expanses, life had become a negotiation of light and visibility. There were no shadows to hide in, no broad leaves to slip behind, no tangled understory to mask the movements of predator or prey. Every gesture mattered. Every misstep echoed. Every heartbeat carried meaning. Some herbivores responded with heightened alertness, relying on large forward-set eyes to scan for danger across miles of terrain. Their ears rotated independently, catching sounds carried on the wind, hoofbeats from distant herds, the low call of a territorial male, or the hushed, coordinated rustle of feathers belonging to predators that hunted as if they shared a single mind. They had become creatures of vigilance, shaped by a world where survival meant seeing danger before it arrived. Others developed social structures more complex than any of their ancestors could have understood. They gathered in groups that stretched across entire valleys, coordinated through vocalizations that rose and fell in harmonious layers. Deep rumbles signaled movement. Sharp whistles alerted the herd to subtle shifts. High-pitched chirps from juveniles triggered protective behaviors in adults, whose responses had been sculpted by countless generations of natural selection. At night, the plains transformed. Moonlight turned grass into silver waves that rippled with the slightest breeze. Nocturnal watchers, feathered, slender, built for navigating the half-light, took positions along the edges of resting herds. Their eyes glowed faintly with reflected starlight, scanning for movement, reading disturbances in the silent dark. These watchers were not leaders, for leadership did not exist in any hierarchical sense. They were simply the ones who had evolved the sharpest senses and had passed them on through the quiet lottery of birth. Predators, too, adapted to the shifting balance of danger and opportunity. In regions where herds grew exceptionally large, some hunting groups abandoned stealth altogether. Instead, they drove panic into their prey like a tool, using speed and coordination to amplify chaos. Individuals flanked and steered, creating a living funnel that forced weaker herbivores into isolation. Every pursuit was a complex dance shaped by instinct and refined by observation. In other regions where prey species were smaller and more agile, predators became shadows again. Their feathers darkened until they blended with the muted browns and grays of dusk. Their calls grew softer, their footsteps quieter. Their strategies resembled intricate puzzles, anticipating not where prey was but where it would be. They learned to predict escape patterns, exploit fear responses, and use terrain as a silent accomplice. Even the plains themselves began to take on character, shaped by the creatures that walked across them. Trails formed in long, winding networks not by deliberate design but by the repeated journeys of countless herds. Over time, grasses along these paths changed subtly, evolving shorter growth patterns that tolerated constant trampling. Predators learned to position themselves along these natural corridors, using knowledge passed not through instruction but through shared experience embedded in behavior. Beyond the grasslands, the forest that had retreated did not vanish completely. Pockets of old growth persisted in sheltered valleys, along riverbanks, and in regions where rainfall remained steady. These remnants of former ecosystems became refuges, living memories of a greener world. Here, smaller dinosaurs continued to thrive, moving with quiet agility among the dense foliage. In these enclaves, the air was rich with scent and sound. Leaves rustled like soft applause. Insects hummed in constant motion. Fruit ripened in brilliant colors that signaled their availability from afar. These environments encouraged behaviors that were as intricate as the layered canopy itself. Cooperative foraging, elaborate mating dances, complex songs that echoed through the trees with a haunting clarity that no other ecosystem could replicate. Some species developed astonishing dexterity. Their hands grew more flexible. Their claws curved delicately for climbing, peeling bark, or manipulating fragile food sources. They learned to coordinate movements with such precision that entire groups could navigate branches that bent beneath their combined weight without breaking. Balance, memory, and spatial awareness became tools as essential as teeth or claws. Amid these treetop societies, intelligence manifested in bursts of creativity, not creativity in the artistic or symbolic sense, but in small, practical experiments that increased survival odds. Individuals discovered that certain stones cracked nuts more effectively when placed on specific surfaces. Others learned that layering leaves over burrows insulated them from unexpected cold snaps. These behaviors spread through imitation, not tradition. Nothing was recorded. Nothing was preserved beyond a lifetime. And yet, each moment of learning reshaped the next generation in subtle, powerful ways. Deep in the wetlands, where ancient rivers split into countless winding branches, the world was different still. Here, life moved slowly, guided by currents and the unpredictable arrival of floods. Vegetation grew thick and tangled, pressing in from all sides. Light filtered through layers of moisture and foliage, giving the air a greenish, almost underwater glow. Dinosaurs in these regions became semi-aquatic, their legs broad and muscular, their feet splayed for pushing against mud. Feathers became water-resistant, slick with oils secreted from specialized glands. Their eyes positioned higher on their skulls, allowing them to remain submerged while observing the shoreline. They hunted fish, amphibians, and any unwary creature that ventured too close to the water's edge. These wetlands were treacherous, filled with predators that moved with deceptive grace. Large, crocodilian reptiles shared the realm, their ancient lineage now interwoven with millions of years of continuous adaptation. Their senses were tuned to vibration rather than sight. When they struck, it was with sudden, explosive force capable of dragging even the strongest dinosaurs beneath the surface in an instant. And yet, despite these dangers, the wetlands thrived. They were nurseries for countless species, sanctuaries for plants that needed constant moisture, and archives for evolutionary experiments that unfolded in isolation from the broader world. Above all of these landscapes, grasslands, forests, wetlands, coastlines, stretched the skies, a realm that had grown increasingly complex as both birds and pterosaurs diversified without catastrophic interruption. Their interactions shaped the air itself. Some pterosaur lineages grew massive, masters of high-altitude gliding. They rode thermal currents for hours without flapping, their wings casting shadows over entire herds as they passed. These giants traveled great distances, linking ecosystems across continents. Their migrations moved nutrients, seeds, and spores from region to region. They became the invisible threads tying the world together. Smaller pterosaurs adapted to coastal cliffs, plunging with needle-like precision into schools of fish. Others specialized in snatching insects from just above the grass, using rapid wing beats and acrobatic twists that blurred their outlines into streaks of motion. Birds filled the remaining niches. Some became expert divers, plunging into rivers and streams. Others developed iridescent plumage designed to attract mates within the dense forests. Many became cooperative breeders, raising young collectively in nests woven from reeds and grasses. And in the midst of all these varied lives, the planet continued its tireless cycle of renewal. Storms swept across continents with patterns that evolved over generations. Lightning set plains ablaze, but fires cleared old growth and fed new life. Droughts pushed species to migrate, rains invited them to return. Ice advanced slowly in distant poles, then receded again as the planet warmed. Each change was a question posed by the world, and life answered without hesitation. Still, for all its resilience, the Earth was not immune to pressure. The slow warming of the sun continued as part of its natural stellar evolution. Seasons shifted. Polar ice thinned. Sea levels rose incrementally, redrawing coastlines with every passing age. In some regions, saltwater pushed into freshwater marshes, creating new ecological frontiers. In others, low-lying plains vanished beneath shallow seas, forcing species to retreat or adapt. Coral reefs grew in bands along the newly formed coastlines, their vibrant ecosystems pulsing with color and movement. Marine reptiles responded to these changes with extraordinary flexibility. Some species moved into deeper waters, where cooler temperatures stabilized their metabolism. Others adapted to warmer shallows, their physiology adjusting to tolerate fluctuating oxygen levels. A few lineages developed social hunting strategies that mirrored those of their land-based cousins. Cooperation born not from communication but from the practical benefits of coordinated movement. All the while, mammals remained persistent, adaptable, and quietly enduring. They spread into niches where dinosaurs seldom ventured: nocturnal burrows, narrow crevices, high branches, and tiny ecological corners that required stealth and small size. Their intelligence grew but always within bounds. They navigated their world with cleverness but without the spark of abstraction that might have altered their destiny. And so the world continued its long, unbroken experiment. Not striving, not advancing, simply enduring. From orbit, if any mind could have been there to witness it, the planet would have appeared vibrant, restless, alive. Storm systems swirled like white blossoms unfolding over oceans. Forests glowed deep green. Grasslands shimmered gold. Wetlands sparkled in scattered networks of silver. The night side was flawless, unscarred by artificial light, its darkness complete and deeply, beautifully ancient. It was a world that needed no witnesses. A world that understood balance without thinking. A world that moved with the patience of drifting continents and the humility of wind over grass. And in this unbroken rhythm of life, time continued its quiet march forward, shaping the future with hands so gentle that no creature ever realized it was being carried into another age. The planet's long cycles continued to turn, each one layering new patterns over the remnants of the last. These were not cycles measured in years or even lifetimes, but in the slow rhythm of epochs, shifts so gentle that no individual creature could perceive them, yet so persistent that, over millions of years, they rewrote the world completely. Where grasslands once dominated vast stretches of continent, a new kind of ecosystem began to take hold in certain regions. These were transitional lands, neither forest nor plain, shaped by subtle increases in seasonal rain and the gradual movement of tectonic plates that lifted distant mountains higher into the sky. As these mountain ranges grew, they trapped moisture in great drifting bands of clouds that spilled into valleys and foothills. Shrubs came first, hardy, thorned, stubborn plants that could withstand both drought and flood. Then came small, wiry trees with deep roots that anchored themselves into dry soil and drank from ancient groundwater. Over millions of years, these pioneers formed open woodlands, islands of shade scattered across the sweeping expanses of grass. Into these new territories stepped creatures shaped by the tension between openness and cover. They moved differently, thought differently, lived differently. Their bodies grew more flexible, their senses more attuned to the interplay of light and shadow. They learned to navigate landscapes where danger could approach from any direction, but where shelter was never far. These open woodland species developed an unusual blend of strategies. Some grazed in the sunlight but retreated to the trees during the hottest hours. Others used the shadows to cross exposed ground unseen, slipping between trunks like living echoes. The predators who stalked them grew equally adaptable. Patience became as valuable as power. A single misstep by prey could spark a chase, but a single mistake by a predator meant starvation. One lineage of predators in particular began to show an intriguing shift in behavior. They were medium-sized, feathered creatures with eyes capable of interpreting intricate visual cues. Their pupils adjusted rapidly to changes in light. Their feathers shifted to either absorb or reflect heat depending on the season. Their brains, compact but efficient, began to show signs of something that had been rare among their kind: long-term planning. Not planning in the human sense. Not strategy maps, symbols, or imagined futures. But the ability to delay gratification, to resist immediate impulse in favor of a result that required patience. They learned to track herds over days rather than hours. They remembered water sources during long droughts. They recognized seasonal patterns in prey behavior. They even altered their hunting routes based on wind direction, terrain incline, and the memory of previous successes or failures. This was not abstract thought, but it was its faintest cousin, a form of intelligence honed directly by survival. Farther north, where cold ruled for much of the year, creatures engaged in an entirely different evolutionary dance. The winters lengthened again as small variations in the planet's orbit subtly shifted the distribution of sunlight across the globe. Snow lingered longer on the ground. Ice grew thicker on lakes and rivers. Migration routes shortened as some species chose to remain in their frozen habitats year-round. Feathers thickened into dense insulating layers, forming patterns that resembled fur more than plumage. Body shapes grew rounder to conserve heat. Metabolism slowed during the darkest months, then surged in the brief explosion of summer. Predators adapted in turn, their paws widening to distribute weight over snow, their nostrils narrowing to warm the air before it reached their lungs, their hearing sharpening until they could detect prey movements beneath a blanket of ice. This northern world, quiet, austere, luminous beneath winter moonlight, shaped creatures that lived as much by instinct as by inherited knowledge. Young learned not from play or exploration but from survival itself. Mistakes were few, for mistakes were fatal. But even here, in the coldest reaches of the continent, life persisted with unwavering tenacity. To the south, where tropical forests still thrived, another story unfolded, a story far older and far more intricate. In one such forest, dense and ancient, a lineage of small, intelligent hunters found themselves under new pressures. Competition increased as climates shifted. Food sources moved unpredictably. New predators entered their territories from the expanding grasslands, their endurance giving them reach that earlier intruders had lacked. Instead of fleeing or being forced into decline, these creatures adapted through behavior rather than anatomy. They began to collaborate in ways that surpassed simple coordinated hunting. They observed dangers from a distance and used vocalizations not only to warn others, but to describe the nature of the threat with subtle differences in pitch and rhythm. A sharp call signaled an approaching predator. A rolling trill indicated shifting weather. A quiet, repetitive click suggested new food sources. Their intelligence deepened, not outward like human intelligence, not swelling into abstraction, complex language, or symbolic culture, but inward, refining their ability to read the living world with exquisite detail. Their minds became maps of their environment, storing memories of fruiting cycles, waterholes, hazards, and the territories of rival groups. With time, intergroup conflict grew rare. Cooperation emerged where competition would once have ruled. Families merged, then split, then merged again, forming fluid social structures that adapted to scarcity and abundance alike. Still, for all this deepening awareness, their minds never sought dominance. They did not shape the world, they let the world shape them. Beyond these forests, on newly forming coastlines where rising seas reshaped the contours of the land, entirely different evolutionary experiments unfolded. Salt marshes expanded. Mangroves flourished. Tidal rhythms created ecosystems that changed not yearly but daily, and any species that entered these borderlands had to contend with constant flux. In these environments, evolution favored versatility. Herbivores learned to tolerate both freshwater and brackish vegetation. Predators adapted to hunt in knee-deep tides. Feathered dinosaurs developed waterproofing and split toes that allowed them to stand on soft mud without sinking. Some even began following the tide itself, feeding along the shifting boundary between land and sea. Marine reptiles ventured into shallows more frequently, their sleek bodies weaving between mangrove roots. Birds and pterosaurs congregated along coastlines in numbers that filled the sky, competing for space, food, and nesting grounds. Their interactions reshaped the dynamics of coastal life with each passing season. And beneath the waves, the oceans churned with life so abundant that even the planet's earliest eras struggled to compare. Coral reefs flourished in warm, nutrient-rich waters where sunlight penetrated deeply. Schools of fish painted shimmering patterns, guided by instincts older than memory. Deep-sea ecosystems thrived in perfect darkness, untouched by the grand dramas unfolding on land. Time, indifferent as always, continued its subtle work. Earthquakes reshaped coastlines. Volcanoes added new layers of land. Mountain ranges eroded into ridges. Old habitats vanished and new ones arose. Nothing about these transformations was sudden, and yet everything about them was inevitable. Across all continents, the most remarkable transformation was not biological but ecological. Life had reached a point where systems balanced themselves with such precision that collapse became rare. There were no sudden voids for a new species to fill. There were no catastrophic extinctions that cleared the board. Every shift unfolded slowly enough for resilience to build layer upon layer. Where one species declined, another expanded. Where resources dwindled, populations adjusted. Where climates shifted, migrations adapted. The world had become a web so intricate that no single thread could unravel the whole. But the greatest force shaping this era remained the quiet rise of awareness among certain lineages, not human-like awareness of self and cosmos, but a deepening ability to read seasons, landscapes, and relationships. In the open woodlands, Young predators learn not only how to hunt but how to predict that in the temperate plains. Herds learn not only how to flee but where safety would be weeks in advance that in the forests. Small agile creatures learn not only where food was but when it would appear based on cues too subtle for any human intellect to detect. Patterns layered upon patterns. Knowledge lived inside instincts. Experience shaped entire populations. There was no culture as humans understand it, no stories, no art, no language, yet there was continuity, and that continuity served as its own kind of memory. The dinosaurs had become masters not of their world but within it. They shaped nothing, they understood everything. And still the planet turned. In time the world would shift again. It always did. Not through disaster but through gentle inevitability. Not through destruction, but through change as indifferent as starlight. The creatures that inhabited this age did not worry about the future. They did not anticipate it. They simply lived in it as it arrived. One season at a time, one cycle after another, without awareness that their world was an extraordinary anomaly in the vast, silent history of possible worlds. A world without collapse. A world without dominance. A world shaped only by the soft persistence of life. And in this quiet resilience, the Earth moved steadily toward another chapter. One shaped not by dramatic leaps, but by the same ancient truth that had guided it since the beginning. Life endures. The world settled deeper into its quiet age, an era defined not by conflict or conquest but by refinement. Every ecosystem, from the sweeping plains to the silent forests to the whispering coasts, moved with a maturity that only millions upon millions of uninterrupted years could create. Life had become something like a conversation between the Earth and its inhabitants. A dialogue conducted without words, without thought, through changes so subtle they were felt more than perceived. The great migrations that once spanned continents grew even more precise as generations layered instinct upon experience. Herds no longer wandered in wide arcs but followed routes so ancient they had become etched into the land itself. Paths deepened in the soil from centuries of footsteps, carving gentle grooves across plains, threading through valleys, and wrapping around the bases of weathered hills. These trails were not chosen, they were inherited, the Earth's own lines drawn through time, guiding the movements of those who lived upon it. Across these well-trodden passages, predators watched with eyes that had grown keen through endless cycles of pursuit. They did not attack blindly. They understood pauses in movement, the signs of exhaustion, the subtle shift in posture that revealed weakness. Their hunts became less about speed and more about timing, less about force and more about reading the silent language of their prey. This intuition, instinct sharpened into something bordering comprehension, shaped every corner of the plains. At dusk, as shadows stretched long across the grass, herds tightened into dense formations, relying on the shared vigilance that had carried their ancestors across countless generations. When threats surged, they did not erupt into panicked chaos but moved in practiced waves, turning as one, shielding their young, presenting a unified front that often discouraged predators from even beginning the chase. Elsewhere, where plains bled gradually into arid plateaus, the world told a different story. These lands were harsher, drier, sculpted by wind more than rain. Rock formations rose like the bones of the earth exposed to sky, worn smooth by time. Only the most resilient life survived here, creatures that understood scarcity and saw opportunity in the smallest signs. Plants grew low and sparse, their leaves thick with stored moisture. Herbivores adapted by developing powerful jaws capable of grinding even the toughest vegetation. Their bodies changed too, skin thickened against the heat, nostrils narrowed to conserve moisture, and legs lengthened to carry them swiftly between rare water sources. Predators in these high, open places evolved an extraordinary patience. They could go days without finding prey, conserving energy with an almost meditative stillness. When they moved, it was with purpose. A single sprint, perfectly calculated, perfectly placed. Their feathers paled to match the dust-colored earth, their eyes shaded by bony ridges that protected them from the relentless sun. At night, the desert came alive with sound. Creatures that hid from the heat emerged to forage under starlight so bright it cast faint shadows. Mammals, though still small and never dominant, scurried through the brush with impressive cunning. Their hearing had grown acute, their whiskers sensitive to the slightest change in air current. They darted between crevices and dug burrows that cooled quickly after sunset. Yet even here in landscapes defined by extremes, the balance remained intact. Predators rarely overhunted. Prey populations fluctuated in natural rhythms. The land absorbed every rise and fall without breaking. To the west, where older mountain ranges sloped toward wide, fertile basins, an entirely different kind of world thrived. These lands received rains carried inland by gentle ocean winds, feeding rivers that cut long green lifelines through the continent. Vegetation flourished in dense, winding patterns. Forests reappeared in these valleys, not the vast, global blankets of ages long gone, but concentrated pockets of deep shade and abundant life. In these forests, life regained the complexity that open grasslands had simplified. Layers upon layers of vegetation created vertical ecosystems rich with opportunity. Insects hummed in clouds around flowering plants. Small, feathered dinosaurs leaped between branches with astonishing grace, their bodies adapted for vertical movement rather than horizontal pursuit. Here, evolution expressed itself through intricacy rather than endurance. Feathers brightened into stunning arrays that shimmered in shafts of filtered sunlight. Beaks sharpened or curved depending on diet. Claws specialized for climbing bark, prying insects from crevices, or manipulating small objects with dexterity unusual for their lineage. Some species developed remarkable mimicry. Their calls blended with those of insects, frogs, or even the rustling of leaves. Their feathers patterned themselves to match lichen-covered bark or the spotted light of the forest floor. Predator and prey alike moved through the trees with a strange elegance, a choreography shaped by stealth and perception. Within these forests lived creatures whose intelligence continued its slow, inward refinement. Their memories grew longer, their problem-solving more flexible, their vocal patterns more layered, and their social bonds deepened, becoming complex networks of mutual reliance and shared learning. Yet even the most intelligent among them remained firmly tethered to the limits of their nature. Their awareness was acute but not reflective. Their communication rich but not symbolic. They understood their world intimately but never stood apart from it as observers. They were, in a way, the purest expression of evolution's intent, not to transcend nature but to inhabit it fully. Far to the east, where tectonic uplift created harsh new cliffs and exposed ancient seabeds, the world changed once again. Minerals released by erosion enriched the soil. Strange plants with thick, waxy leaves flourished. Herbivores adapted by developing stronger tongues and specialized digestive systems that broke down the chemical defenses of these plants. Predators followed, evolving strategies that balanced risk and reward with exquisite precision. Some grew smaller, better suited to navigating the rugged terrain. Others grew larger, leveraging the advantage of height and strength in ambush attacks from elevated positions. Even the air felt different here, thinner, sharper, filled with scents carried vast distances across barren rock. In the oceans, the story was one of continuous transformation. Sea levels inched higher as global temperatures shifted, but the rise was slow enough that marine life adapted without catastrophe. Coral reefs crept along new coastlines. Warm currents nurtured explosions of biodiversity, while colder currents maintained ancient ecosystems in deeper waters. Marine reptiles refined their dominance through adaptability rather than size. Some developed sonar-like sensitivity to vibration. Others learned to cooperate in hunting, circling schools of fish into tight spirals before striking with synchronized precision. Pterosaurs soared above these waters, riding thermal currents rising off the waves. Some species had wingspans so wide they cast fleeting eclipses as they passed overhead. Their calls echoed across shorelines, mingling with the cries of seabirds and the distant crash of waves. Nothing on this world was static. Nothing resisted the slow shaping of time. Every lineage bent, adjusted, refined. And through all these changes, the gentle expansion of forests, the retreat of plains, the shifting of mountains, the warming of seas, one truth held across every continent. Life had learned the art of endurance without excess. There were no species that disrupted the balance. No organism that claimed the earth as its own. No creature that severed itself from the rhythms of nature. The intelligence that existed was rooted, grounded, intimate with the land. It reached no further than it needed to. It asked for nothing more than survival. And the earth, in return, gave it everything it required. As time advanced, the sun brightened fractionally, a change imperceptible to any creature but significant enough to begin yet another slow transformation. Ice withdrew further into the poles. Warmth seeped into higher latitudes. New plants colonized newly opened territories. Rivers shifted their courses. Old lakes evaporated while new ones formed. Life followed as it always had. And the world, unscarred by catastrophe, unburdened by ambition, continued the only story it had ever truly cared to tell: adapt, endure, continue. Nothing more was needed. The dinosaurs, in all their shapes, sizes, colors, and minds, moved through this quiet arc of history without knowing how extraordinary their world had become. They lived without regret, without expectation, without any awareness that in another possible timeline, their reign had ended in fire. Here there was no fire. No ending. Only the long, steady breath of a planet at peace with itself. And so time flowed onward, carrying life with it, not toward progress but toward deeper integration. A world where existence was not a ladder but a circle turning endlessly beneath a sky that had never been named. The Earth had entered a phase of time where eras no longer felt like separate chapters, but like variations on a single, unbroken theme. Climate no longer swung wildly between extremes, it drifted, adjusted, breathed. Seasons lengthened or shortened by degrees too small for individuals to notice, but across the span of thousands of years, entire ecosystems shifted like shadows at sunset, slowly, gracefully, and without resistance. In these vast stretches of continuity, life refined itself with a patience that only uninterrupted evolution can produce. The species that inhabited this world did not chase after radical change. They perfected the roles they already held. Their forms grew elegant in their simplicity, efficient in their function, quiet in their existence. Across the wide interior of the continent, where grasslands once surged and forests once retreated, a new balance emerged. A mosaic of habitats that changed with altitude, with wind, with soil, with the faint tilt of sunlight across the year. No single biome dominated. Instead, the land became a tapestry woven from threads of forest, grass, scrub, and wetland in endless combinations. This patchwork encouraged a diversity of life unlike anything the planet had yet seen. Species that had once been constrained to narrow niches now interacted in fluid, shifting ways. A predator adapted to the forest edge might hunt across open plains during the dry season. A herbivore built for scrubland might wander into wetlands during warm months when seasonal pools offered rich vegetation. Boundaries faded. Movement increased. Adaptation became less about specialization and more about flexibility. In these ever-blending landscapes, creatures evolved bodies suited for many worlds at once. Limbs lengthened or shortened depending on regional needs. Feathers thickened in cold seasons, then flattened and shed in warmer months. Coloration shifted with age, with climate, and with social interaction. And senses sharpened, not to detect rare dangers, but to interpret constant variation. One lineage in particular began to show extraordinary behavioral complexity. Descended from small, intelligent predators of earlier eras, these creatures had become masters of multi-environment living. Their bodies were lithe, balanced, and covered in feathers that changed texture depending on humidity. Their eyes read movement with uncanny precision. Their hearing could distinguish between the snap of a twig underfoot and the distant tremor of an approaching herd. But it was their minds that set them apart, not in the human sense, not in abstraction or imagination, but in the sheer depth of environmental awareness they possessed. They learned environmental patterns across multiple scales, not just daily shifts of temperature or wind, not just seasonal changes in food availability, but the long curve of multi-year cycles. They remembered droughts that had occurred generations earlier, not because they lived long enough to witness them personally, but because their extended social networks passed down awareness through behavior. When the land began to show the slightest signs of an approaching dry age, slight shifts in plant coloration, subtle changes in migrating insects, faint irregularities in river flow, these creatures adjusted their foraging patterns and extended their territory long before scarcity arrived. Their intelligence was not cumulative in a cultural sense, but it was cumulative biologically. Each generation inherited instincts sharpened by the experiences of those before, encoded not as stories or symbols but as refined responses, precise intuitions. Far to the north, climate stability gave way to a different kind of challenge. The ice sheets, diminished for millions of years, began to grow again in slow, deliberate pushes across the landscape. Winters deepened. Summers weakened. Snow clung to the ground longer each year, pressing life to adapt in ways that demanded creativity from evolution. Here, in cold lands brushed by long nights and long dawns, a new class of dinosaurs emerged, robust, stoic creatures with bodies built for conserving heat. Some grew thick, fatty layers beneath their feathers. Others developed multi-layered plumage that trapped warmth in empty spaces between barbs. Their nostrils narrowed to warm inhaled air. Their hearts beat slower during the cold season, allowing them to conserve energy through long periods of scarcity. But the greatest adaptation was behavioral. These creatures developed habits of cooperation not seen elsewhere. They did not form complex societies, but they learned patterns of communal survival, huddling together during the coldest nights, rotating positions to shield weaker individuals, traveling in coordinated routes to find sheltered feeding grounds. Their communication became low and rhythmic, a series of pulses and rumbles that traveled through snow more effectively than through air. Predators in these icy regions learned patience above all. They grew paler, blending with the landscape. Their muscles became finely tuned for slow, steady stalking through deep snow. Their hunts could take hours, unfolding in intimate silence as they shadowed prey across frozen plains. And when the moment came, they relied not on long chases, impossible in deep winter, but on perfectly timed bursts of power. To the far south, where warmth still held strong and the air hummed with moisture, tropical forests reached new heights of complexity. The canopy thickened, rising into multi-layered worlds of shadow and filtered light. Vines coiled around trees in spiral embraces. Fruits ripened year-round in a near-constant cycle of abundance. Insects evolved dazzling colors and patterns. Birds and small feathered dinosaurs responded with songs that grew increasingly intricate, not symbolic but expressive, a language of tones that carried information about food, danger, weather, and social bonds. Some creatures learned to mimic these calls, using them to deceive predators or lure prey. Others evolved vibrant plume displays that shimmered like living mosaics when sunlight pierced the canopy. The forest floor, once empty, grew crowded with life adapted to constant humidity. Even the soil teemed with organisms that never saw light, breaking down organic matter almost as soon as it fell. In these forests, life felt almost weightless, carried upward by the sheer multiplicity of interactions. Intelligence thrived here, not in a rising arc toward complex thought, but in a widening circle of perception, creatures attuned to the smallest changes in color, scent, sound, vibration. And yet, even in these lush realms, a shift was beginning. Not a drastic one, not a collapse, but a slow redirection like the turning of a great river. The global temperature had risen just slightly, again imperceptibly to individuals, but enough to nudge ecosystems into new configurations. Forests expanded in some regions, shrank in others. Wetlands dried into fertile plains. New coastlines appeared. Old ones slipped beneath the sea. The world was changing, again, not violently, not suddenly, but inevitably. Certain lineages began dispersing into new territories, traveling farther than their ancestors ever had. Migratory patterns grew longer. Herbivores ventured into cooler climates that had grown unexpectedly mild. Predators followed their prey, then adapted to the new rhythms of unfamiliar lands. Coastal creatures began treating entire shorelines as continuous habitats rather than isolated ecosystems. Life was becoming more connected than ever before. Not through communication, not through culture, but through the simple, powerful pressure of a world in motion. Species that had once been isolated by forests or mountains now encountered each other, and these interactions created an explosion of evolutionary paths. Some merged territories peacefully. Others competed. Some hybridized across generations, creating new lineages with traits finely tuned to mixed environments. The Earth was reorganizing itself, and life responded as fluidly as water shifting to fill a new container. None of these creatures knew they lived in a world defined by near-perfect balance. They felt no gratitude for the absence of catastrophe. They had no awareness of alternate histories where their kind vanished in fire. Theirs was a world free from sudden endings. Their story was written not in destruction, but in the continuous, undramatic resilience of species that adapted because the Earth asked them to, and they listened. As the ages continued to unfold, the planet prepared itself quietly for yet another chapter, one shaped not by dominance or intelligence, but by the same ancient truth that had guided life since the beginning: the world changes. Life follows. And the dance continues. The Earth had grown into a world of transitions, not abrupt, not violent, but flowing, continuous, vast. Every horizon seemed to blur into another ecosystem, another pattern of life shaped by millennia of gentle pressure. Forests no longer stood apart from plains. Wetlands no longer ended where the land rose. Instead, everything bled into everything else, weaving a planet-wide tapestry of interlocking habitats that shifted with the patience of drifting continents. In this age, the land was alive with quiet motion. Herds crossed regions as if guided by invisible lines etched into the soil. Predators shadowed them in slow arcs that spanned months. Birds and pterosaurs drew their own roads across the sky, tracing ancient pathways shaped by winds older than memory. And everywhere, the planet breathed through cycles so regular they felt like the pulse of a living being. Along the interior lowlands, where warm air rose in shimmering waves and the ground undulated in gentle swells, a new kind of ecosystem had taken shape. Not quite grassland, not quite woodland, something between. Small clusters of trees dotted the hills like islands, their roots digging deep into aquifers fed by distant, melting glaciers. Between these islands stretched broad expanses of golden grass that swayed in slow, hypnotic motions. This landscape favored creatures built for versatility. Herbivores evolved strong legs for both sprinting and climbing, capable of ascending rocky outcrops or darting across open ground depending on the threat. Their eyes grew sharper to read danger in the shifting patterns of grass. Their ears attuned to subtle sounds, the rustle of feathers, the distant crack of dry twigs, the low hum of wind running through hollow stems. Predators changed alongside them. Speed was no longer enough, neither was stealth alone. Success demanded interpretation, of wind direction, herd density, the terrain's curvature, the timing of seasonal rains. Hunting became an art refined by generations. Packs did not just pursue, they planned according to the landscape's memory. They circled prey in arcs shaped by instinct and the faint echoes of strategies that had worked centuries before. Farther east, where the land rose gradually into foothills carved by long-vanished glaciers, colder winds shaped a different kind of life. These lands were harsher, defined by abrupt changes, sudden frosts even in warm seasons, storms that rolled down from the mountains with little warning, long stretches of silence broken only by distant thunder. Here, creatures had developed thick, layered feathers with colors muted to blend with rock and snow. Their bodies stored fat reserves for unpredictable winters. Their senses sharpened to read shifts in humidity, cloud movement, and the faint crackle of static that preceded storm bursts. Every decision, when to hunt, when to rest, when to migrate, depended on interpreting signs in the landscape, signs so subtle most other species would never notice them. One lineage in particular thrived in this rugged terrain, medium-sized, cold-adapted hunters with a strange mixture of solitary and social behaviors. They moved alone when food was scarce, conserving energy. But during the harshest storms, they gathered in loose groups inside natural rock shelters, sharing warmth and exchanging low, thrumming vocalizations that resonated through the stone. These gatherings were not acts of community but survival. Yet over time, such survival behaviors shaped instincts of trust that persisted long after the storms passed. To the south, where warmth still reigned and rivers braided into wide, fertile floodplains, the world grew lush with different possibilities. Here, plants flourished in layered abundance. Thick mosses coated the forest floor. Towering ferns unfurled in dense clusters. Water pooled in shallow basins, feeding insects and small creatures that darted among the shadows. A remarkable lineage of feathered dinosaurs emerged in these wetlands, lightweight, semi-aquatic creatures with long, slender legs and narrow, probing beaks. Their feathers repelled water. Their keen eyesight allowed them to detect movement beneath the surface. Over time, they developed a fascinating behavior: coordinated foraging. Groups moved through the shallows in sweeping formations, driving fish into tight clusters before striking with surgical precision. Their minds were not reflective, but their coordination bordered on something that looked almost deliberate. They positioned themselves based on subtle gestures: a tilt of the head, a ripple of feathers, a brief trill. No hierarchy structured their movements, yet they acted with unity that no single individual controlled. It was the same principle guiding schools of fish or flocks of birds, but more advanced, more grounded in cognition. Far above them, the sky grew increasingly contested as pterosaurs and birds diversified in response to shifting environments. Some lineages of pterosaurs developed immense wingspans that allowed them to cross oceans with little effort. Others shrank, becoming agile hunters of insects and small fish. Birds, meanwhile, evolved new strategies: powerful legs for running, curved beaks for cracking tough seeds, or intricate songs that carried across dense canopies. In time, the air itself became a realm of continuous negotiation. Flight patterns overlapped. Territories shifted. Different species learned to avoid one another through complex visual displays or distinct calls that echoed across valleys at dawn. On the coasts, where sea levels had risen slightly due to subtle global warming, new habitats emerged. Salt marshes expanded, creating nurseries for countless life forms. Mangroves spread inland, forming labyrinths of tangled roots where small predators hunted with alarming speed. Marine reptiles ventured farther up tidal channels, feeding on fish and crustaceans that flourished in brackish conditions. Even here, the balance remained as stable as it was dynamic. When one species declined due to a shifting current, another filled its place. No collapse created vacuum. No vacuum caused chaos. And yet, beneath this calm equilibrium, something deeper was beginning to unfold. Not an upheaval, not a catastrophe, but a subtle broadening of possibility. Across several lineages, predators, herbivores, omnivores, cognition continued to refine itself along practical, grounded lines. Instincts layered with learned behavior created creatures capable of analyzing, adjusting, anticipating. They did not imagine futures, but they prepared for them anyway. They did not conceive of time, but their behavior stretched across it. Certain predators learned to mark trails with scent for reasons beyond territory, to guide others, to record paths through dangerous terrain, to signal the presence of food sources found earlier. Herbivores developed rotational grazing patterns that prevented overuse of certain regions, protecting the land without ever knowing it. Forest-dwelling dinosaurs learned to use particular trees as safe roosting landmarks, returning year after year with astonishing accuracy. These were not inventions, not culture, not technology, but the early scaffolding of something evolution rarely constructs without interruption. Patterned intelligence distributed across populations. Creatures were beginning to behave not merely as individuals, but as nodes in vast ecological systems. Responsive, adaptive, interlinked. No single species dominated. None altered the planet by force. But together they shaped a world where resilience increased with every generation, where the planet grew more interconnected, more stable, more alive. Beyond these networks of life, the Earth itself shifted in slow, quiet ways. The sun continued its gradual warming. Tectonic plates nudged continents further apart. Mountain ranges rose by imperceptible degrees. The magnetic field wavered, adjusted, re-strengthened. Rivers carved deeper channels. Volcanic activity reduced slightly, creating fewer new lands but allowing older lands to settle into mature, fertile stability. Through it all, life adapted with such effortless fluidity that no species ever sensed disruption. This was the beauty of a world without collapse. A world shaped by countless small adjustments rather than by the violence of sudden endings. And still time flowed. The planet did not hurry. The creatures upon it did not rush. Life advanced not in leaps but in spirals, returning to familiar strategies, then refining them, deepening them, repeating them across ages. In this long, quiet evolution, the Earth approached a moment in its history where nothing stood out as remarkable, and yet everything was extraordinary. A world where balance was not an achievement but a state of being, where intelligence existed without ambition, where survival was not a struggle but a continuous dance with an ever-changing planet. What came next would emerge slowly, like dawn creeping across an ancient horizon. Not a revelation, not a discovery, but the next natural step in a world that had forgotten catastrophe. The world had entered an age so vast and steady that even the slowest changes seemed eternal. Every landscape felt ancient yet endlessly alive, shaped by countless cycles that softened mountains, split forests, expanded coastlines and carved deep, winding river systems through the heart of continents. This was a planet that no longer remembered abrupt upheaval. It had grown into a place where evolution expressed itself like a long breath, steady and unbroken. Across the central regions of the largest continent, a new ecological harmony had emerged. It was a place defined by openness and shadow, where rolling fields of tall grass rose and fell like the swells of a quiet sea. Interspersed among them were clusters of low, resilient trees whose roots dug deep into the soil, tapping ancient underground reservoirs. These woodlands formed natural sanctuaries where creatures sheltered during the most intense heat of the day. Here life had grown both agile and cautious. Herbivores crossed these lands in slow, deliberate movements, grazing in arcs that followed the subtle rhythms of seasonal growth. Their bodies were lean but powerful, built for distance rather than speed, adapted to long migrations that unfolded like rituals passed down through the ages. The patterns they followed were not taught, they were inherited, etched into instinct by 1,000 generations before them. Predators watched these movements with quiet precision. They did not chase recklessly, the land punished wasteful energy. Instead, they stalked from a distance, reading the slightest irregularity in a herd's formation. A shift in posture. A lagging individual. A sudden tightening of the group. These signs told a story that only predators understood, a story of opportunity born from imbalance. Their hunts became moments of profound silence, unfolding slowly across vast distances. They did not run until the final breath of the pursuit. They shadowed the herds for hours, or sometimes days, waiting for the moment when instinct and circumstance aligned. When it did, the land seemed to hold its breath as predator and prey engaged in the ancient cycle that sustained the balance of the world. To the west, where the land rose into dramatic stone formations shaped by wind and patient erosion, life adapted to harsher conditions. Rocky outcrops cast long shadows across the plains, providing cover for creatures that had learned to navigate broken terrain with remarkable agility. Their feet grew tougher, shaped for gripping uneven ground. Their eyes sharpened to detect predators emerging between the angular ridges. Yet even predators of these rocky highlands held a different relationship with the land. They were solitary, patient, and measured, not out of choice but necessity. Food was scarce. Water even more so. Their lives were governed by the rhythm of scarcity, and every decision was a negotiation with the terrain. They learned to conserve energy, to rest in shaded crevices, to travel only when the temperature dipped. They were not powerful in the way of plains hunters, but they were enduring, their survival strategies older than the geological formations they lived among. Far to the north, cold dominated. Winters stretched long and deep, pressing life to its limits. The creatures here had evolved forms that defied the harshness around them. Thick layers of insulating feathers trapped pockets of warm air. Nostrils narrowed. Lungs expanded. Hearts grew efficient, beating slow and steady inside bodies built to withstand months of scarcity. Food appeared in brief explosions during short summers. Plants flowered rapidly. Insects swarmed in vast numbers. Migratory species arrived in great herds and flocks, turning the land vibrant for a handful of weeks. Every creature in these frozen realms lived in anticipation of this moment. Their breeding seasons, migrations, and hunts aligned with astonishing precision, creating a symphony of life compressed into the narrow band of warmth the year allowed. Predators of these frozen lands were masters of patience. They could trail prey over snow for days without making a sound. Their pale plumage made them nearly invisible. Their movements minimized noise, conserving energy for the moment of absolute necessity. When they did strike, it was with explosive force, ending the chase before it truly began. To the south, where warmth still collected in thick, humid air, life continued to unfold with vibrant intensity. Forests here grew massive and layered, their canopies forming towering green ceilings that filtered sunlight into shifting mosaics of gold and shadow. Vines cascaded like rivers from branch to branch. Leaves dripped with condensation even in the still hours of the afternoon. Creatures of these forests were shaped by abundance. Some developed brilliant plumage, patterns that shimmered in the soft light. Others developed specialized beaks, claws, and sensory abilities for navigating the dense vertical landscape. Intelligence thrived here in ways unique to these forests, not in abstraction but in adaptability. Creatures learned routes through branches, understood seasonal fruit cycles, communicated with layered vocalizations that served as warnings, invitations, or territorial displays. In the wetlands at the edge of these forests, life embraced water as much as land. Swamps and marshes pulsed with activity. Semi-aquatic dinosaurs glided through shallow channels, their movements smooth and fluid. They hunted with precision shaped by reflection on still water, striking only when the slightest ripple betrayed a hidden prey. And yet, even as all this life thrived within its ecosystems, a subtle shift began to weave itself into the fabric of the world. Not disruptive, not dramatic, but persistent. Temperatures rose by insignificant degrees over tens of thousands of years. Rain patterns altered. Forest edges expanded into open land in some regions while retreating in others. Migrations adjusted with a fluidity that made the changes nearly invisible to the creatures shaped by them. Across these evolving landscapes, a new kind of ecological dialogue began to emerge, one that connected species, behaviors, and instincts in ways that had never happened before. Creatures began to shape their environments by the simple consistency of their actions. Herds dispersed seeds across vast distances, unintentionally guiding the spread of certain plants. Predators regulated populations that might otherwise overwhelm delicate ecosystems. Seasonal migrations created predictable patterns of nutrient movement across continents. Even the smallest insect played a part in maintaining soils, pollinating plants, recycling organic matter. Slowly, without intention, without awareness, life created the foundations of a self-maintaining planet. Everything reinforced everything else. Balance was not a fragile equilibrium but a vast, interconnected stability that grew stronger with each generation. Yet beneath this thriving world, beneath the stability and the unbroken continuation of life, something else stirred. Not a threat, not an omen, but a possibility. A faint shift in the trajectory of evolution, so slight it would take millions of years to shape, yet present in the quiet behaviors of countless creatures across continents. Certain species were beginning to develop instincts that bordered on cooperation without necessity, patterns that extended beyond survival, awareness that reached slightly farther than the immediate moment. Not thought, not reason, but the early glow of something like foresight. It was nothing yet. Only a suggestion, a whisper inside the long breath of the planet. But in a world where catastrophe had never wiped the slate clean, where intelligence had been allowed to grow slowly, continuously, without interruption, that whisper had time. Time to grow. Time to deepen. Time to become something new. And the earth continued turning, carrying this faint spark across an age that had forgotten endings. Eventually, even endurance meets its horizon, not as a wall but as a widening silence. Far in the planet's future, long after continents had worn themselves smooth and oceans had reshaped their boundaries countless times, the sun continued its slow, patient transformation. It did not flare or explode. It did not announce its intentions. It simply grew warmer, brighter, fraction by fraction, year by year, million by million. The change was subtle enough that no single generation could detect it, yet relentless enough that nothing living could escape its influence. Seasons softened at first. Winters shortened. Ice retreated from places where it had once defined life itself. Plants responded before animals ever could. Growth accelerated. Cycles shifted. Ecosystems that had relied on delicate balances began to feel strain, not from catastrophe but from abundance that arrived too easily, too often. What had once been a careful negotiation between scarcity and survival became something less stable, less predictable. Dinosaurs adapted as they always had. Migration routes shifted again, stretching farther toward the poles where cooler air lingered. Feathered forms adjusted insulation downward, shedding layers generation by generation. Bodies became leaner. Behavior changed before anatomy ever did. Populations moved, reorganized, fragmented, and reformed in response to pressures that no instinct had been shaped to anticipate. But this time, adaptation demanded more than adjustment. It demanded retreat. As temperatures continued their gradual climb, entire ecosystems began to thin. Forests withdrew from low latitudes. Grasslands yellowed, then fractured into isolated patches. Water became less reliable, rivers less permanent. Wetlands shrank. Shallow seas warmed and lost oxygen, reshaping marine life in ways even ancient reptiles struggled to match. The planet was not dying. It was transforming into something simpler. Dinosaurs endured this transition longer than any lineage had a right to. Their diversity thinned but did not vanish. Some became specialists of the remaining temperate zones. Others adapted to nocturnal lives, avoiding heat by retreating into darkness. Still others shrank, trading dominance for efficiency, strength for economy. The giants faded first, not dramatically but quietly, as the energy required to sustain them became harder to justify. What remained were creatures refined to their limits. Smaller, smarter, more cautious. Lives measured not by abundance but by precision. And yet, even precision has boundaries. As the sun brightened further, the margin for survival narrowed beyond what evolution could compensate for. Ecosystems lost redundancy. Food webs simplified. Recovery after disruption slowed. Extinctions no longer rippled outward, they accumulated. Species disappeared not because they failed, but because the world had finally moved beyond the conditions that had shaped them. There was no final roar. No great dying. No moment anyone could point to and say this is where it ended. Life simply became quieter. The last dinosaurs did not know they were last. They lived their lives as every generation before them had, feeding, migrating, reproducing, responding to the world as it presented itself. There was no awareness of legacy, no sense of conclusion. When the final lineage vanished, it did so without ceremony, without witnesses, without memory. And the Earth continued. For millions of years after, the planet belonged to smaller, simpler forms of life. Creatures that required less energy. Organisms content with narrow margins. The grand age of giants faded not into legend, but into geology, its traces pressed into stone and slowly erased by time. Eventually, even complexity itself receded. Not abruptly. Not tragically. But inevitably. The sun's warmth rose beyond what multicellular life could tolerate. Oceans thinned. Atmospheres shifted. The Earth returned slowly to a quieter state, one dominated not by animals, but by resilience in its most basic form. From the outside, nothing marked this as failure. It was simply the completion of a long experiment. A planet that had once stood at the edge of catastrophe, spared by chance alone, had lived out its alternative history fully, without witnesses, without storytellers, without ever knowing how close it had come to becoming something else. No intelligence had recorded it. No memory preserved it. No voice ever asked what it meant. And perhaps that was the point. In one universe, dinosaurs vanished so that minds like ours could rise, remember, and wonder. In another, they endured so long that wondering was never required. Both worlds were shaped by chance. Both were complete. The difference was never in who survived. It was in who was left to tell the story. And somewhere, in the vast silence between stars, the universe remained unchanged, utterly indifferent to which version of Earth unfolded beneath its light.